Since this shape is basically circular, I'm not going to draw this manually, but I'm going to use another circle spline as a starting point to create our template. And I'm going to move this circle spline up to about here, and let's change the radius and make this a lot smaller. And in order to create this opening up here, we're going to combine this circle spline with a rectangle spline. So let's go ahead and add a rectangle spline to the scene, and I'm also going to move this up to about here, and I'm going to scale this down quite a bit to about here. And in order to combine these two objects, we're going to use a spline mask object. And let's make the circle and the rectangle children of that spline mask object. By default, this object is set to union, which in this case is exactly what we need. Right now we're not going to worry about the fact that we have a nice and round corner here. That is a detail that we're going to add when everything else is done. So our template is basically finished, so I'm going to rename this to hole/protrusion template, and I'm going to center the object axis on the spline mask object, and we can do that by going to Mesh, Axis Center, bring up Axis Center, and we can use the default settings here, but we have to check Include Children and use all objects. So now we can use this template as a starting point for creating the next object, which will be the gaps. And in order to make modeling those gaps a little bit easier, I'm going to rotate the reference image a little bit. So let's hit Shift V to go back to our viewport settings, and on the back tab we can change the rotation of the reference image, and I'm going to bring this down to -22.5 degrees. Let's make a copy of our template. I'm going to make the original invisible and rename this to gap, and I'm going to rotate the gap -90 degrees, and I'm going to reset the object axis. We can do that by enabling axis, setting this number here to 0 and switching off enable axis again. And now we can move this around and line it up with the reference image. And right now we can't use the spline mask object as it is because it combines the circle and the rectangle, but we need to be able to continue this line here. So let's change the mode of the spline mask object from union to A subtract B. Also, this circle is curving in a little bit too much, and we need to make this circle follow this line a little better. So what we can do is select the rectangle tool and change the width to maybe about here. I'm using the bottom of this protrusion here as a guide. So this looks pretty good. And now we can make this spline mask object editable. Go to point mode, and I'm using the rectangle selection tool to select these 2 points and delete them. In order to be able to continue this outline here, we have to get an opening here. And we can do that by selecting either this point up here or this point down here, and then changing some settings. So let's select this point up here, and let's right click and set this as the first point and see what happens. Nothing happens because we also have to select the spline and uncheck Close Spline. So you can see we're getting an opening, but it's not where it should be. Now if this happens, you don't have to select the other point and try again. What we can do is reverse the sequence first and then set this as the first point. And now we have the opening where we need it to be. Because this gap is symmetrical top to bottom, we're only going to create 1/2 of this gap. So in this case, I'm going to select the top points here and I'm going to delete them. And in order to be able to continue this line, we're going to select this point here, and then we're going to select the pen tool. And because we've selected this point, we're immediately getting this line that is attached to this point. And all we have to do now is to create one more point. And I want to create this below the inner circle. The reason is because we have to make this object intersect with this circle in order to be able to subtract the gap from that circle later. So let's left click and drag, and I'm just going to line up the tangent here at the top roughly with the center of this black line in the reference image. I also want to get rid of the bottom handle. In this case, that's not really important, but it gives me an excuse to show you a few things. So let's hold down Shift, left click and drag on this handle and just make it smaller. And now I'm going to switch to my Move tool. And when you have the Move, Scale or Rotate tool selected, you can double click on a point and open this window here, which says Values and Tangents. And the reason I made this bottom tangent smaller is because if both of these tangents have the same length, I can never tell them apart. So by making this smaller, I know that the smaller numbers refer to the smaller tangent. So in this case, we'll get rid of the right tangent, which is the bottom one. So now we've created a very rough outline of the shape we need. In the next video, we're going to learn how we can tweak spline points and get the shape that we want.